Well, I've been away from this channel for a while now, and several months in fact, and I apologize for that, but I've been extremely busy with other things in my life that have taken priority. Now, one good thing is that it has allowed me to kind of step back from the channel and reset my thinking on where I want to take it now. Oh, well, it's good to be able to bring some of my Uncle Ben's photos out for all to see and give you kind of a general outline on some of the performers and personalities of the jazz age and beyond. You don't really get any insight on what life was like for the day-to-day existence of a jazz musician in the early 20th century. Now, remember that this was a time of great social upheaval, from the liberalism of post-World War I Europe to the Great Depression of 1929, through the early 1930s, the rise of fascism, and eventually the Second World War. But life went on, and many of the aspects of life that we find mundane were really no different for them. Before I get started, I have a shout out for Google Translate. Now, I've never shied away from criticizing Google for some of their business practices and products, but I do find that some of their products to be very helpful and actually make the world a better place. So I'll be even-handed and give praise where praise is due. For many of these documents, I was able to use Google Translate to translate them into English. And what I really like is that it doesn't just do a word-for-word translation like a typical foreign language dictionary, but actually uses context clues to give a more accurate translation. So props for that. For this episode, I found a wide variety of things to share with you. While I have a few photos to share, a lot of what I'll show is letters and other documents that sort of fit together into a chronology of the life of a rather well-known jazz musician touring Europe in the 1920s and 30s. Now, I chose 1937 as a good place to stop. That was the date of my last picture, and it also marks a sort of transition from straight jazz to swing music, although that was really more of an evolutionary process that started much earlier. But anyway, enough of my chattering, on with the show. For anyone who watched episode 1 of this channel, you'll be familiar with the name Chuck Schofstall. He was the leader of the KU Jayhawkers, a dance band popular with the students of the University of Kansas. I covered her in earlier episodes. It was one of the Jayhawkers' trips to Europe that Ben almost literally jumped ship. Now, this is one of the earliest clippings I found amongst Ben's belongings, and it might be an indication of where at least part of the inspiration to become a professional touring musician came from. I'm sure that in many ways the idea of being a touring musician was something he dreamed of doing for a long time. I remember when I was a kid, I fantasized about becoming a rock star, but sadly the musical gene skipped a few generations, and I never had the talent or the discipline to stick with my own musical ambitions. But at least for me, it was something that developed from an early age, and I have to imagine that the idea of traveling the world, or in this case Australia, according to the article, must have seemed very appealing to a young Ben. Here's a work permit from December 10th, 1926, allowing Ben to work in Belgium with Frank Garanti's world-famous Georgians. Now, this actually confirmed some information I had unearthed a while back that showed that in addition to the Georgians' engagement at the Kurhaus Hotel in Schweningen, Holland, he had also played down the coast in Belgium. So you'd have to imagine a professional musician would like to listen to records just like anyone else. At least it seems so, given this receipt for a gramophone, for which Ben paid 60 guilders. I wonder whatever happened to it. I mean, I would guess he sold it, since it's sort of a bulky thing to drag around the continent. One of the really great things about doing research for this episode is really digging in and learning the history of some of these people and places. The Erfrischungsturm Jelmoli translates literally to the Jelmoli snack stand. As it turns out, Jelmoli is actually a department store in Zurich, Switzerland, that has been in existence since 1833. So I'm actually trying to form a picture in my mind of what this might look like, because to me, an American department store may have a small restaurant, which actually is mostly a thing of the past now, but in any case, it wouldn't have been big enough to house an orchestra performance. The current Jelmoli has been extensively renovated over the years, but at one time I found out that it actually featured a good-sized courtyard, and it occurred to me that maybe it contained a small cafe or something that would have qualified it as a snack stand, and it might have been big enough for an orchestra to have played a concert there. So if you have any idea of what that might have looked like, or any, how that might have worked out, just please let me know in the comments. Well, it looks like Merrick Webber's secretary needs to learn to center the paper better in his or her typewriter carriage. This thing was justified so far right it runs off the page. Still, I wonder what a genuine Merrick Webber signature goes for these days. It is nice, though, because it gives us a definitive start date for Ben with Merrick Webber's orchestra. This November 27, 1928 advert for a Merrick Webber concert in Hamburg says it's only 30 pfennigs, which sounds like a real bargain to me. A little about this convent garden. A book printer named Johann Jacob Siegmund Vermeer opened the convent garden as a beer garden with a music pavilion on 24th July 1853. A year later, he completed the complex with a hall where entertainment and classic concerts took place. Now, it's also still in existence. You know, what's amazing to me is that so many of these establishments still exist, considering the devastation caused by Allied bombing during World War II. March 1st, 1929 has been in Prague playing with Teddy Sinclair. This flyer is for the concert held in the Great Hall of Lucerna. The Great Hall is the main hall of the legendary Art Nouveau multifunctional palace close to Wenceslas Square. The Lucerna Palace was built in 1921, and it also still exists in 2022. It still hosts classical concerts, opera, ballet, and even jazz concerts. Not sure at what point in 1929 Ben joined the Deus Bella Orchestra. This flyer helpfully provides prices for seats for this concert. Of course, I have no idea what a franc was worth in 1929, so who knows whether these were good prices or not. I like that there's a nice little bio piece on the back. If you read French, feel free to peruse this. I can wait. Even as far back as the 1920s and 30s, musicians had to have their glamour shots, and George Lysagang took some of these for Ben back in 1930. I don't know if 259 marks is a good price or not, but I have to get those pictures. Let's talk about Buddy Rogers. Now, Rogers was a famous actor and band leader during the 1930s. And as I've begun to dig, I found strong evidence that Rogers, who like Ben, was born and raised in Olathe, Kansas, knew each other from way back. It is likely that they may have even come into contact with each other as far back as high school. Now, it's very hard to read, but this particular picture from Rogers from some magazine or newspaper is inscribed, "For Ben, just so you won't forget someone from the hometown who wishes you continued success, Buddy Rogers, 1930. Now, I found the quotation marks around the name Buddy particularly interesting, probably because he would have been known to Ben by his given first name, Charles. I also found that in 1937 to 38, Ben probably played with Rogers Orchestra. Now, I say probably because I've been looking for evidence to back up some things I came across that strongly suggest that that may be the case, but I've yet to be able to confirm that. So I will look into that for future episodes. On September 4th, 1929, the U.S. stock market crashed, throwing the United States into economic depression, and the rest of the world soon followed. Germany was particularly hard hit, and saddled with reparations imposed by the Treaty of Versailles following World War I, which were largely secured by loans from American banks, the German economy was devastated. For whatever reason, an American journalist by the name of O.O. McIntyre, writing for the Kansas City Star newspaper, filed a series of articles in early August 1930 about the entertainment scene in Berlin. Now, Mr. McIntyre's articles talk about how life is nearly normal due to the dole, which is supposedly similar to unemployment payments in the United States. According to him, it's enough to live comfortably on. Oh, he does mention beggars, but they appear to be nothing more than a nuisance in his opinion. And the overall picture he paints is that all will be well and the economic hardship is just a passing phenomenon that will quickly be forgotten. Well, as it turns out, things weren't nearly so rosy as O.O. McIntyre would have us believe. In fact, it is highly unlikely that things would have gone from great to abysmal in just 3 months. Things had to have been in decline prior to. And it appears that Americans were getting a very different idea of how the Depression was affecting Europe in general and Germany in particular. This document from the State Labor Office, dated November 7, 1930, at the height of the Great Depression, shows the effects on the German labor market. The government was so anxious to get native Germans back to work that they were denying residence permits to foreign workers and urging employers to seek out German workers to fill open positions. This letter reads as follows. State Labor Office, Brandenburg. Due to the catastrophic job market situation, the residence permit for musicians Ben Pickering and Raymond Allen working in your band is no longer granted. In order to fill these positions, I ask you to contact the Specialist Work Certificate for Musicians in Berlin, Bendelstrasse 22. There are musicians for these instruments available in sufficient numbers. At the same time, I request that the Latvian citizen Wolf Gradis come here again on Tuesday, November 11, 1930, for the purpose of further statements. Now, this was sent to Deus Bella, so obviously that was for him to transmit to Ben, and the message was that, hey, you need to look for musicians here in Germany that can work for you so that we can ease the unemployment situation. And then, as you can see, even in July 1931, Ben's application for a residency permit to work with Carl Lindstrom was rejected by the Berlin Police Department, who was apparently in charge of such things. Reading from the translation, the Chief of Police in Berlin, July 14, 1931, your application dated 6/23/31 for a permit to work with Carl Lindstrom AG. I regret not being able to comply. The refusal is due to the endangerment of significant economic interests since the Labor Authority did not agree to the granting of the residence permit. Your residence permit issued to you on 6/23/31 remains in force. So apparently things had begun to ease up a little bit by the end of 1931. This is a contract Ben signed with René Dumont, for whom Ben played from December 3rd, 1931 to February 1932. Now, it also appeared while he was in between gigs, before playing with René Dumont, Ben put in some time studying at the prestigious Rott Conservatory, which is also known as the Stern Conservatory, which still exists today. I didn't want to take this newspaper out of its cover due to its disintegrating condition, but I wanted to point out the front cover featuring Deus Bella with a picture of Ben on his trombone. I looked up BT to try to find out what kind of publication it was, but couldn't find anything. But if anyone is familiar with BT, please leave a comment below. I'd like to know more about this publication. I talked before about how doing this research, pieces begin to fall into place and things that didn't make sense before suddenly come into focus. Now, this article was just such a puzzle piece. I had previously assumed that everything I had found related to St. Moritz was from Ben's visit with the Georgians in 1927. As it turns out, he was actually there at least twice. This December 16, 1931 article answers a couple of questions. First of all, Ben was there with René Dumont's orchestra in late 1931, early 1932, as his ski rental slip from 1932 shows. And that's where I got these two photos. The first is from Charlie Chaplin. Now, I featured this in one of my previous episodes, identifying it incorrectly as having been taken in 1927. However, since we do know Chaplin was there in 1931, and I cannot find any evidence that he was there in 27, we'll go ahead and assume that this is actually from 31. Now, the second, which was previously unidentified due to the sloppy signature, appears to be film actor Douglas Fairbanks, since he was also there at the time, according to the article shown previously. Now, Ben seems to have been sort of knocking about in the 1932 to 33 time frame, trying his hand at different things, none of them that resulted in any long-term gigs. Now, this particular article came out of left field, seemingly not something that Ben would have been interested in doing, and as we see, it was a short-term engagement lasting only a month. Here is the translation so you can see what I mean. Jazz in Switzerland. During the month of April, a 13-man ensemble put together by Pillet for this purpose will make a guest appearance at the Metropole Bel Air in Lausanne. This orchestra is divided into working the cafe and the dancing, with 6 men dancing alternately in the afternoon, then the whole ensemble in the cafe from 6 to 7, half the ensemble dancing, the other half from 9 to 11 in the cafe, and then from 11 to midnight, the 13 men together in the dancing. Pillay has understood how to put together an ensemble that can fully do justice to both genres and this division, but whether director Bronneman will always find such an ensemble remains to be seen. In any case, it will hardly be worthwhile for a boss to put together an orchestra that is faced with such difficult demands, and only for a month. Pillay had a lucky hand, because we find in this orchestra Riquet Schleifer, trumpet, Walter Baumgartner, piano, Maria, saxophone, Lachman, drums, a famous trombonist name, etc., etc. Now, as near as I can make out, we have a 13-man ensemble playing dance music, by which we can assume to mean jazz, and cafe music, which is probably more traditional music such as would be played at a French or German cafe. And it would be unique indeed to find such a group that played both genres, and apparently equally well. Now, I've tried without success to determine who this Pillay fellow is, or director Bronneman. I mean, they may be the same person for all I know. But since this was found in Ben's items, we can only assume that this unnamed fabulous trombonist must have been him, which must have been a real delight to know that he was a fabulous trombonist. But anyway, there's no date on this article, but 1932 to 33 would probably seem to be about right, as he was knocking about doing different things with different artists. And we've already established him as being in Switzerland in early 1932, so that would be an educated guess, but the best we can hope for at this point. Now, this fascinating little coupon booklet was issued to Ben for the annual exhibition of the Great Fascist Revolution in Rome, Italy in 1932 to 33. Remember, this was when Mussolini was in power. I think he took power in 22, so this would have been the 10th anniversary of the Great Fascist Revolution. And in this little booklet are discounts for goods and services offered by different businesses participating in the exhibition. It appears that Juan Losas' management used the same stationery dealer as Deus Bella. Notice the band photo at the bottom of this first page of this contract dated May 21st, 1932. I've seen Deus Bella's contracts. They had the same band photo at the bottom. My research on Losas, which I covered in episode 7, was probably the most unusual outfit that Ben played with in that period. Losas' orchestra played tango rather than jazz. And I noted in that episode that tango was actually very popular in early 1930s Europe due to the influx of young Argentinian males visiting on their year abroad following the completion of their secondary school education. By 1933, the economic hardships were beginning to ease, as seen in this letter from Paul Godwin's management to Ben asking if he would be interested in taking a position as a trombonist. I do have a note in my timeline of Ben's career that in November of 33, he was playing with Deus Bella, so it seems he was not interested in returning to Godwin's orchestra. But given that Godwin's career was in sort of decline at this time, his last recordings being in 1933, if Ben actually did decline that gig, it wasn't a terrible decision. Now, this photo from a publication called Rund das Mikrofon, which is undated, but I believe to be from 1933, shows Ben, that's him on the trombone at the far left with Deus Bella's orchestra. Rund das Mikrofon translates to around the microphone. So I gather it was a magazine for the recording arts, possibly. I do know this publication was around until at least 1955. That's the latest I've been able to find online with an issue featuring Dr. Bernhard Ernst, who was a popular sports broadcaster at the time. So if anybody knows more about this magazine, I appreciate knowing a little bit more about it. As a writer, the origin and meanings of the words has always held a special meaning for me, and I often find that words may have different meanings in different countries and at different times. So when I saw this article that refers to the Winchester Ballet, it didn't make much sense to me. I never associated ballet with jazz or the trombone as an instrument with ballet, but I think one possibility was that the Winchester Ballet is a musical ensemble. According to the website for Italia Performing Arts, ballet traces its history from the Italian Renaissance spectacles which combine music, singing, poetry, dancing, and decoration, an amalgamation of all the arts. So it is possible in this context that ballet in looser terms may be used to describe a musical act even if dancing is not part of it. I haven't had much success in translating this letter from March 26, 1934 due to the handwriting. I can't, of course, read cursive, but the normal context clues that you often see are not there. Usually you can differentiate between similar looking letters like a lowercase m or n, or in situations where there is no noticeable looping like letters I and E. And so that makes this letter kind of confusing for me to translate. But what is obvious is that the sender is Gustav Bumke, who is trying to apparently instruct Ben on playing a particular piece of music. You'll notice the musical notation in different places. And I also recognize the modal terms Mixolydian and Lydian from my limited guitar background. Gustav Bumke is, if you remember the transcript from the Rott or Stern Conservatory, one of Ben's former instructors there. And it's really neat how these connections tend to come to light as you really start digging into this material. This has caused me to dig into Mr. Bumke's career, and as it turns out, he was quite important in German musical history. As a young man and multi-instrumentalist, he met the son of Adolf Sax, inventor of the saxophone, and from that point forward, he dedicated himself to the study of and creating compositions for the saxophone. In fact, he founded the first German saxophone orchestra. Now, this also establishes how Ben became familiar with the saxophone, because up to this point, he was known only for playing trombone, but later we find him playing sax with different acts, and that was a huge surprise for me. As a brief little detour, this is an interesting duo, and I had to do some digging, and even now I'm not entirely sure about the accuracy of my information, but I did manage to put together a little synopsis. Now, the picture is autographed by Harry White and Frank Terry, and near as I can tell from the one photo I was able to find online, which shows Frank Terry in old age, he's the one on the left. Now, Frank was quite a famous stage actor who toured Europe and Asia under the name Nat Clifford. And Frank Terry toured Europe and Asia on the legitimate stage, professionally known as Nat Clifford. And he then returned to the U.S. and acted in a number of silent film comedies. Now, an interesting tidbit that he was also known for accidentally handing actor Harold Lloyd what he thought was a prop bomb. The bomb then exploded in Lloyd's hands, causing the loss of 2 fingers and a thumb from his right hand. So this is a pretty significant incident. He later became a writer for Laurel and Hardy in the 1920s and 30s. Now, Harry White, on the other hand, was a trombonist and a drummer who worked with Duke Ellington and later Cab Calloway. According to Calloway's trumpet player Edwin Swayze, White was actually the person who coined the term jitterbug. The reason I put this here is that in 1934, Swayze penned a song called The Jitterbug, and as a result, of course, it became a household name in a well-known dance craze. Now, how White and Terry became a duo is a mystery to me, but the people they crossed paths with were all people that Ben had also encountered. So if anyone has any further details, I'd love to hear them. This one had me kind of stumped. As near as I can figure, this is some sort of Italian train ticket discounted for entertainers. I do see a date of August of 34, and that lines up with the timeline I have where Ben was with Ugo Filippini playing in Italy. The paper is printed on is very flimsy, like newsprint. If this is indeed a train ticket, I guess I expected it to be thicker or on a different kind of paper, like a modern boarding pass for an airliner, but I've never really traveled by train, or certainly not at that point in time, so I guess I wouldn't really know. Now, this listing from November 1936 edition of the Metronome shows Ben Pickering with Tommy Dorsey. And what I find more interesting, however, is the list of more well-known instrumentalists at the bottom, and that includes some real musical giants, such as Artie Shaw on sax, Louis Armstrong and Louis Primo on trumpet, Miff Mole and Glenn Miller on trombone, and pianists Art Tatum and Fats Waller. So some real musical, some real titans there. And this ad for the opening of Manny's Music location featuring Dorsey with Jack Teagarden. A quick Google Maps search shows that sadly this Manny's location at 208 Forsyth Street in New York, as indicated in the back of this ad, is no longer open. It's really too bad because, I visited a couple of Manny's locations, not this one in particular, but it's kind of sad to see historic location like that ended up having to close. This 1937 ad for Conn Musical Instruments identifies Ben as a star trombonist with Tommy Dorsey's orchestra. I'm sure he appreciated the star billing that he was receiving after a rather long and varied career. And so we end it here in 1937. We'll pick up the next episode in 1938-ish time frame. That's where Ben would have reconnected with Buddy Rogers. I'll see if I can confirm this somehow, because that would be of particular interest to me. And then we'll move into the swing age of the 1940s and look into that phase of his career. Oh, by the way, you may have noticed my T-shirt. This is what I've been thinking about selling on my channel. It's a Jazz Live logo there. It's kind of cool. I've never wanted to make this channel about selling stuff, but I really thought it was kind of a cool design. So about worth giving it a shot. If anyone is interested, let me know. And I'm really trying to build my subscriber base. So please subscribe if you haven't already. I'm really not much of a marketer myself, so I kind of rely on you to help me get the word out. Tell your friends and neighbors if you think they'd be interested in this. I'd really appreciate it. And until next time, we'll be seeing you.